Or a gym. No gym.
Right, because that's not what they're zoned for, correct? Regardless of there's a buffer or not, you just can't put, also, why would you want to put a business in the middle of a residential home? You get no traffic. It's, what is it? Economic development, location, 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 right? I think the reality is that if you put a business in the middle of smack in the middle of a residential neighborhood, you might get very little traffic. You might get very little sales. I think for me, what is critical to understand when we're talking about these buffers is that while our city is growing, it's still a pretty small city. And so we have large commercial corridors, West Picacho in District 4, for example, that are right next to residential neighborhoods, right? Large commercial corridors, urban core zones that are right next to homes, because that's just the size of our city. We are just not big enough to have only commercial zones that don't rub up against any residential homes. And so for me, it is a matter of equity, actually. And to me, equity would not be implementing another buffer for multifamily home. That would actually not be equity. For me, equity would be removing this one. And I think that often when I hear, people's comments and their fears of the removal of the buffer, to me, it's still rooted in stigma. I think, we voted just a little while ago on a full liquor license at a location that is in a residential area. Spirit Winds, I believe is what it is. Spirit Winds is right next to a home on the back and on the side. In the front street, there's homes. On the catty corner, there's an apartment complex. And I thought maybe some of you would come up and say, we don't want that. We don't want alcohol sales, full alcohol sales right in the middle of a residential area. It's not in the middle of a residential area, it's next to a residential area. And so I thought some of you might have something to say against that, because liquor is also dangerous to youth, to adults, but nobody did. And I think it's because we're far beyond the prohibition of alcohol that we have just normalized it in our societies and in our communities. The prohibition of cannabis has been in our community for about, a year? 14 months maybe. And so I get that there is deep-seated fear of what we don't understand, of what has been intentionally driven in society for us to be scared of cannabis. And a much deeper layer to that is a racial analysis, to be scared of the people who are consuming cannabis, which is everybody. But in this country, we have said that predominantly black and brown men are the ones that are going to suffer the consequences of prohibition. There's lots of layers to this, and I'll get off my soapbox in a minute. I just think it's important to recognize that the size of our city places a ton of limits on on all of these kinds of retailers. And just ultimately, I also think that the 300 number is completely arbitrary. I mean, really, a year ago we said, how about 600? How about 700? How about 1,000? It's completely arbitrary, and we landed on 300. I was doing some research around data on other states and other cities. It's all over the place. There's 0 for residential buffers. There's 1,250-foot buffers on residential buffers. The more critical buffers continue to be the buffers around schools and daycares. Those are not going away. No one's talking about making those go away. But I do want to note that, everyone's saying keep the 300-foot buffer. Would a 100-foot buffer be effective in the outcomes of ensuring youth aren't smoking cannabis? 200? Would 600 be more effective? Is the ultimate buffer prohibition again? Because I don't think we're going back. And so here we are. We have 30 retailers. We have plus other uses. And we are, in essence, continuing to place prohibition-style barriers on this industry that is now a legal industry. And so I do want all of you to reflect on what makes you say definitely keep the buffer for cannabis, but not for full sale of liquor. I think that's an important reflection to make. You all know where I stand on this. I've talked about this multiple times, and I just wanted to make that note and that distinction, that while the buffer may or may not be removed, you still cannot have any type of retail business smack in the middle of a residential neighborhood because it is not zoned that way. There are layers to zoning. And in urban centers, there are more flexible zoning so that people can open business. Put out there that I thought I wanted to help clarify in my own words. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.